Yeah, I'm glad I brought it. I was just like, it might be easier for like the process grants. All right.
Recording in progress.
Do what? Oh, I think Zoom's not working, so it's not on. Oh. Okay, because we can't see it on our computers, but that's okay, right?
Yes, it's okay. We could probably get it working if you want to monitor it, but we can monitor it for you.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
It's more of just if someone is online that.
Yeah, we'll
we
make
don't know
sure, we'll monitor it, make sure if somebody raises their hand.
That's great.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, good evening. Tonight is Monday, December 16th, 2024, and this is the Historic Preservation Commission, and we'll start with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Commissioner Whidden.
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
Commissioner Berg.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Bocamp.
Here.
Chair Haley.
Here. And then approval for our agenda this evening.
I'll make a motion to approve. I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And any public comments that are not on our agenda tonight? And seeing none, we'll move on to probable cause, which is 833 Lafarge Avenue. Do we have any one that needs to recuse or anything for this one? Okay.
Good evening, Chair and Commission members. I'm Emily Klein Gibson, Planner 2, presenting the staff presentation tonight. This application is a probable cause application for 833 Lafarge Avenue. This is a residential property located on the corner of Lafarge and Walnut Street, with Spruce Street located to the south. Just a reminder that granting probable cause is how the HPC approves grants for historic structure assessments. HSA grants cover up to $4,000 for residential properties and $9,000 for commercial properties. Their reimbursements, non-matching, and the landmarking criteria is used to evaluate probable cause for a building. The conditions over time for 833 Lafarge Avenue can be seen on this slide. Here you can see the left two photos show historic images of the house between 1973 and 1988. And the right photo shows present-day conditions. Permit records indicate minor changes such as a re-roof, change in some of the windows, and an addition, but much of the original building footprint remains. For the landmarking criteria, the age of the building is approximately 77 years old, satisfying the 50-year requirement. The Colorado Cultural Resource Survey for this property states that the architecture for this building is unique because some of the qualities, like the sheer volume of the building and its tall flight of steps leading to the front door, are not typically found on residential buildings in Louisville. This is probably because the building was used as a church for most of its existence, so there is social history related to some of Louisville's religious community. And as mentioned before, there are minor exterior changes over the years, but the overall building footprint has remained. With all of this, staff recommends finding probable cause and approving a grant of up to $4,000 towards the cost of a residential historic structure assessment. This concludes the staff presentation. I'm available for any questions, and the applicant is also present and would like to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? All right, thank you. And if the applicant would like to speak, and just state your name and city of residence or work.
Good evening. This is Andy Johnson with DAJ Design here in Louisville. About 50 years into the life of this building, we moved to Louisville and had the pleasure of seeing it in its church function. And it was probably one of the most rockin' places on a Friday evening. It used to be a Spanish-speaking Pentecostal church, and it was awesome. Drums, guitars. It was probably the best live music in Louisville at that time, because at that time, Louisville had slowly started to become discovered, but this was a fun place. Shortly after that time, probably within a number of years, a realtor who had sort of made a hobby out of converting old churches similar to this, similar to maybe the one like on Grant and Pine Street, had made kind of a hobby out of converting these old churches that maybe had kind of fallen to the wayside into residences, and had it as his residence for a number of years, and successfully updated it and made it up to contemporary living standards. And so it's been a residence ever since. So pretty short time period. We did get a pretty good look at this structure. I've known it quite a bit over the last 20 years. And it's a cool building. It's really unique for where it is in Old Town. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
All right. Any questions? Excuse me. You're good. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. All right. We'll bring it. Any public comments on this property? All right, we'll bring it back for discussion.
I'm pleased to see that this is being proposed for evaluation and possible landmarking. That whole stretch of Lafarge is, with the little houses and bigger, is really a kingpin of historic Louisville. So I think it's great.
I think it satisfies all of our qualifications, 50 years or older, strong social significance, very little architectural change. So that's there for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with the social merit. A little bit on the fence architecturally. I think there's been a fair amount of changes, both the addition on the north side as well as the rear. The windows swapping out in the front as well, but socially it certainly meets merit. I don't totally agree with staff's suggestion that it's a unique residential structure because of its shape. It's unique because it was a church massing. Just because it's turned into a residence doesn't mean it's it's like saying you turn a McDonald's into a residence and it's unique because it has golden arches, right? But I would certainly support moving forward with the HSA.
If anyone wants to make a motion, anyone?
I'll make a motion to approve probable cause for 833.
I'll second it.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Whitten,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap, Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson, Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes, sorry, got ahead of myself. Yes. And I think the HSA will be, to your point, will help us kind of see like what could be taken back or what kind of some of the different options are also. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is being treated as a residential HSA. It seemed like we had some other case where the building was residential now, but it was treated more largely as with a commercial.
And it depends on the
range.
zoning. I think we had the property on Pine that was the opposite. Yeah, so it depends on zoning as far as what the property is used for or could be
Okay.
used for. Yeah, so this one has been changed previously back to residential, so that's what it
Okay.
is slated for. Yeah, a good question. All right, thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to hearing more about the HSA. All right, our next probable cause is 1237 Grant Avenue. We'll have a presentation from staff. If anyone has a conflict of interest,
I'm going to recuse myself from conversation of 1237 Grant as the applicant's a family member.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what, because why?
The applicant is a family member of mine.
Got it.
And we'll make sure we call you back in when we're finished.
All right, good evening again, Chair and Commission members. This is Emily Klein Gibson, Planner 2, with the staff presentation. This application is a probable cause application for 1237 Grant Avenue. This is a residential property located in the northern section of this block of Grant Avenue. It's located south of Lafayette Street, north of Caledonia Street, with Lincoln Avenue to the west. The conditions over time for 1237 Grant Avenue can be seen on this slide here. The left photo is an image from the 1948 assessor's card, and the right photo shows present-day conditions. There are a few changes that have been made to the exterior of the building, and permit records also reflect that. The architectural style is minimal traditional, and the property exhibits a side gabled roof with small front gabled extension over the front entryway, which is original to the house. For the landmark criteria, the age is 76 years old, satisfying the 50-year requirement. As mentioned earlier, the architectural style of the property is minimal traditional, which was a common home style post-World War II. For social significance, ownership of the property stayed with one family for 3 generations and was passed down to a woman in the family each time. The first generation owner of the property was Annie Patetti, who migrated with her husband from Italy. As for the physical integrity, again, the building has minimal exterior changes and has not moved from its original location. And with all of this, staff recommends finding probable cause and approving a grant of up to $4,000 towards the cost of a residential historic structure assessment. And this concludes staff presentation. I'm available for any questions, and the applicant is also present and available for questions. Thank you.
Any questions for staff on this one?
No.
All right, thank you. And would the applicant like to speak? You don't have to, but if you'd like to, you're welcome to. And just if you'll state your name and city of residence.
Rosemary Kavanaugh Whidden, new resident of Louisville, which I'm thrilled. All my children live here. It's time for me to be here. I didn't have the pleasure of meeting Anna and Glenn Hansen, who built the house and lived there until last year, till 2023 when they both passed. I did meet their daughter, Teresa. And when I spoke with her, and she told me the history of the family and raising the children, the house didn't even have an original bathroom inside. They had an outhouse. I fell in love with the family. I fell in love with the fact that it's always been owned by a woman. I'm planning to live there with my sister, who I care for. And one of the attractions was the location. Second was no stairs, which is important for myself as I'm aging and my sister. So I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be able to be here. It's a perfect house in a wonderful town. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Does anyone have questions for the applicant?
No.
All right. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay.
No.
Any comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll bring it back for discussion.
Very straightforward as far as I'm concerned.
I would agree. I find it intriguing that, again, the female ownership and the number of times it's been passed on, and then for it to be at that point again is pretty neat, I would say.
It's quite a long time to have the house in one family, and as far as we can tell, there's been very few, substantive changes to the home. So I think it meets all of our criteria.
I think its age is significant too, just the post-World War II. Like, we don't have as many of those in that area. So again, just adding more of those to our landmark list is really important. So good social history.
I would move that we approve probable cause for this property at 1237 grant.
I second that motion.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right, thank you. Staff will be in touch with kind of next steps and as far as the HSA process. So thank you so much for bringing your house to us. And then we just need to let Sloan know that we're finished. Thank you. Then our next item is our discussion for the HSA process and for grant funds. We have a staff report.
Good evening, Chair Haley, members of the commission, Rob Zucchero, Community Development Director for the city. I'm going to present on this item here. At the October meeting, the HPC asked if we could have a discussion about our process and criteria for HSAs. So I'm going to go over that. We provided a staff report with some background on that. Let me get the slideshow going here. So what we've provided you just to help frame the conversation is kind of a background and an evolution of the grant program and where HSAs came into that. I think that was pretty interesting just to see how things evolved over time and how we got to where we're at, both from a funding standpoint and how we treat HSAs in relation to already landmarked versus requiring them before landmarking. There's a summary of the process and standards. I do want to pull up the standards and the criteria and kind of go through those and see if you have any questions as well. We provided example HSAs from 23 and 24. We're probably missing some, but we tried to get most from those last 2 years. And then I've got some discussion questions. I know there's public comment and presentation as well this evening. But this is the history that I gave you, and I gave you a link to all of the documents if you had time to review any of those. I know earlier we were talking about kind of the purpose and of the Historic Preservation Commission, and there is a resolution that sets forth your purpose that City Council adopted in 2002 when the commission was established. The ordinance, it's been amended several times, but the base ordinance that you work from as far as demolition review, landmarking criteria, and so forth, that was created in 2005. 2008 is when we had the first sales tax. It's been renewed, as you know, but that was the first 10-year period and when the fund was established in 2008. So it took a couple years to kind of get our feet under us as a city, I think, as we were creating the structure of the fund in 2009. And the first grant program was in 2010. They treated commercial and residential the same. It was a $1,000 incentive, $5,000 grant. They had these pre-development studies. They didn't call them historic structure assessments. You could use that $5,000 to go towards a study. There wasn't a separate amount called out, and you had to be landmarked. This wasn't a pre-landmark activity that could be funded. So what I kind of called the modern era of our grant program, I think started in 2012. That's where we really upped the grants pretty significantly, especially for commercial properties, and we talked about historic structure assessments specifically within the funding resolution. And at that time, if you add up all the grants, the incentives and the different grants that we had for new construction as well as rehabilitation, restoration, it was a total of $250,000. For commercial properties, you could do an HSA, you could get $6,000 for that, but you had to be landmarked in order to get that grant. I think the idea is a different philosophy. Once you're landmarked and you're getting ready to do the restoration, you can go in for that HSA to evaluate the structure. Residential was $21,000 for all the grants totaled up, $900 for the HSA, again, must be landmarked. I think pretty quickly, it looks like the city figured out that probably wasn't the best way to do it because people wanted to landmark and get their grants at the same time. And if you don't have the HSA, it wasn't very informed. So in 2014, the city amended it so that historic structure assessments could be done. They didn't have to be done prior to landmarking. So you could get that $6,000 for commercial or $900 for residential in 2014. So the last, when the tax was updated for another 10 years, we came back to the commission and we figured out, hey, how are we going to restructure these grants? We know we've got more money for at least another 10 years. Certainly, the 2012 grants were out of date. Construction costs were going up. So we increased the commercial a little bit to $275,000 total for all the grants together. The incentive went way up. I think it was like $10,000 to $50,000, no strings attached incentive. $9,000 for the HSA, $60,000 for residential. So it went up a lot more relatively. It almost tripled. And then $4,000 for the HSA. And that doesn't include extraordinary circumstances. So that was just to get it up. Again, the philosophy wasn't that this pays for everything. This was to make your project viable from a financial standpoint so that hopefully people aren't demolishing the properties and it's subsidizing it, but not necessarily paying for all eligible expenses. In the 2019 grant, we required that you do the HSA. There's an exception, but generally we require it before you landmark so that everybody knows, hey, are there issues with trying to preserve this house? What do we think it's going to cost? Well, you know, most people want to do grants at the same time anyway, so we actually made it a requirement prior to landmarking and prior to your grant application with exceptions that could be granted for those HSAs. So that's kind of the evolution over time. I think that helps provide a pretty good context. When we work with applicants, you know, we've got a website with information, we have a process, kind of point by point that we go through with applicants on the HSA. We copied our HSA standards directly from the state, from History Colorado. It's verbatim how we do our HSAs. And so I had links to both of those documents in the staff report so you can see exactly what's included, and I was going to pull that up as well. But these are just the main categories that we go through when we're doing those. So just from a high level, this is what happens for the most part. You know, somebody comes to staff typically and asks about landmarking. Even when they're not landmarking or maybe just coming in for demo, we say, hey, do you want to do an HSA? This might be a good candidate just to look at the structure. If you want to start the process for historic preservation or if you're looking to demo the property, we encourage people to do HSAs. Our history museum staff create a history report, which provides a lot of great information for the historic structure assessment. And then staff schedules the probable cause hearing, and that's where you all get involved. You see the staff report, you see the museum report. And then certainly if you agree with that it meets the requirements for probable cause, you can approve that grant. At that point, as you can see over the last 2 years, everybody that's done an HSA has been a local architect that we're familiar with. We know they're qualified. Doesn't always happen, but it usually happens in Louisville, which we're very fortunate to have all that expertise here. But periodically, if it's a different consultant, we do require that we will approve the consultant. They have to be an architect or an engineer or a planner with experience in historic preservation. The project has to be led by an architect, even if you bring in a structural engineer to do the work. So part of what we're supposed to be doing is making sure it's a qualified consultant, and we go over the scope. If they're not familiar with the scope, make sure that they're going to meet all our standards. We get that report, we check it, and make sure that it is following the outline and that all the elements are included that are required to be included. And then once they show proof of payment to the architect or the consultant, then we'll reimburse the property owner. You all will see those HSA reports we don't give them all to you, but if they come to you as a landmarking or for a landmark designation or a grant, you will see those. Those are always included. So you have the opportunity to review not all of them, but a lot of them when they come back for landmarking. I'm just going to jump out of this real quick. Spend just a little time kind of going over the standards here in a little more detail, because I gave you kind of all the chapters that are in the HSA, but I wanted to go through in a little more detail just to show you some of the standards. We standardize it so that hopefully we get, with each HSA, they're looking at the same criteria. They're using the same evaluation criteria which I think is helpful for consistency when we're doing grants and landmarking. But you know, the first part, of course, is just the cover page, table of contents, the introduction, you know, very basic stuff before we get into the depth of the historic structure assessment. The first part is the history and use. This is, I think, where it gets more interesting. This is where the museum's report really usually plays a pretty large role, at least setting the stage for the structure. So we've got a really great resource for that. And then I think the consultants really start putting more into the architectural significance, construction history, floor plan, and proposed use. So if they know what they want to do with the project, if they're you know, looking at some building additions, this is where that can come in. And then the structure condition assessment. You can see here that it's structured as description, condition evaluation, and recommendations. So all the HSAs are supposed to follow the same outline, where you first do this, the description and the significance, and then the condition evaluation. So we, in the, you know, the state process and our process, we talk about 3 different levels of condition, and we describe them. So hopefully it's consistent from report to report. Good, fair, and poor condition, and that criteria is set. So when you're looking at the structure itself and the architect and the engineer are evaluating it, they should generally be following how the criteria has been set. And then you get into recommendations. And these are all kind of the subcategories. So you've got the site itself, around the building, the whole property, and then you get into the structure. So we break it out into, you know, the floor and the ceiling, the foundation, the walls, windows, doors, interior finishes, mechanical systems, electrical systems. So all of these are supposed to be evaluated separately. This is certainly where the structural engineer, being part of the consultant team, can add a lot of value. The next section is analysis and compliance. This is where you're looking at maybe, does it have asbestos? Does it have lead paint? Does it comply with zoning? Are there zoning issues? Are there building code issues that need to be considered for upgrade? And then the preservation plan itself. And there are, this is where they're supposed to lay out, okay, how do we maintain this building or restore it to meet a certain historic character? And they talk about deficiencies, critical, serious, and minor deficiencies. Again, that's all spelled out so that hopefully there's consistency in how the consultants are categorizing the plan itself. Phasing plan, and then costs. So especially for the grants, that maybe helps set a baseline for the cost. Those often get updated when the grant application comes in. And then there's things like photographs, illustrations, appendices, which can add some, if there's historical photos that weren't included, or drawings or floor plans, those can be placed there. So that's kind of a detailed analysis, or I'm sorry, a detailed description. Again, you've seen a lot of these in your packets. They should all generally be following that same outline. Okay, so staff came up with some questions. Certainly we can talk about anything, but these are the questions we put in the staff report. Just basically, what questions do you have about the process or content of historic structure assessments? And then we get into some more detailed questions. As I was anticipating, what I think you probably want to talk about. One is there's, you know, you all have been talking for quite a while. We've heard a lot from others about the importance of a structural analysis. And so we could certainly require structural analysis in all HSAs. We can leave it as being optional, but we could have different grant amounts. That's something that's been talked about as well, if they bring in a structural engineer. And then the grant amounts. Certainly we can talk about increasing the grant amounts. The State Historic Preservation Fund, they have an ongoing grant program. They provide up to $15,000 for structure assessments. They may see some much more substantial buildings than we see here as well. but that might provide some type of baseline. I don't know the last time they updated that. They require a 25% match. We require no match at all. I think if you want to talk about grant amounts, you know, we might do a little bit more research, bring back some proposals. From the staff point of view, we think it's probably ripe for increasing the grant amounts. It's been since 2019. There's been a lot of inflation. There's been a lot of construction inflation. So I think all of our grants, and I know that's on your work plan, is to look at all of our grants, including this one. We can come back with some recommendations and a deeper dive into that. And then any other questions you have about the HSA process that we're not hitting on that you want to dive into, certainly we can do that this evening and then talk about next steps. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And so did we want to start the discussion now, or do we have?
Well, so I know there's at least one member of the public who, and I know he's going to pool some time to make a longer presentation. So if you want to hear from the public first and take public comment and then go into questions and discussion, that's fine as well.
Okay. Does anyone have input on how we want to structure the time?
I think it might be beneficial to hear from the public first.
Yeah. Does anyone have questions specifically for staff before? That was really helpful, I think, seeing the evolution and all the detail of the process. So thank you for putting that together. Yeah, that was
Yep,
great.
You're welcome. All right.
So we'll open up for public comment and presentation. Again, just your name and city for the record.
Okay. Andy Johnson, again from DAJ Design here in Louisville, also Old Town resident. As many of you know, our firm is oftentimes hired to do HSAs. I did an audit of all of our HSAs, and I went back just to spare you from the details. I went back to 2019 when there was a significant change in the code in terms of the amounts that were offered for HSAs. However, in 2009, we did our first one, and it started with Heather Lewis, who used to be on the commission, who had volunteered her time and hand-sketched a solution to a nationally registered home on Grant, and we got to do the project, and it was really cool. Since then, we developed, a long-term relationship with Heather, who is actually not an architect who does residential work typically, but did a really beautiful plan. And we had a.
I think actually she is an architect, but she designs.
She's an architect who does veterinary work, but she's not typically
clinic.
a residential architect. And we got to know that intimately because we ended up doing a home for her up in Breckenridge. And she developed this beautiful scheme, and we got to do the project, and it was really successful. So that kicked off our tenure with the Historic Preservation Program. I'm going to just go right into it. I know this is hard to read, but and it looks like the monitor doesn't show the whole thing. Like at all, actually. Like that. Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. So this is a spreadsheet that we developed for the audit, and it goes back to 2019. It looks at all the HSAs that we had started from 2019, and then I have a summary section at the bottom. I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail, but you can see there's a lot of HSAs that have been completed over that time. Looking back over the time of 2023 to 2024, this year, you can see that there were quite a few of those that happened within that 2-year period. There are 15 that we did this year. the ones that are highlighted are all commercial, and you can see that because of the column second over from the right. And so at the end, we have some notes around whether it was landmarked, whether it's planned to be landmarked, whether it was previously landmarked, or if we don't know, or maybe nothing's going to happen. All of this I will provide as notes for your meeting minutes, and you can review it. I will share it with staff, and they can disseminate it however it makes the most sense. The summary is where the real meat of this discussion is. Okay, so on the far left, HSAs per year, you can see that 2019 we had 2. We had a big uptick during COVID. Everybody's looking at their home. We start doing assessments on these homes in Old Town. What are we going to do to remodel? And then we go into project mode, and things are happening within 21, 22. Little low on the HSAs that we're completing, but then it starts to increase as we get closer to this year. So out of the 30 that we completed since 19, 15 of them were this year. And most of the commercial ones were this year. We did an analysis on average billing rate between residential and commercial, and I really want you to pay attention to this. Keep in mind that our typical billing rate is at $150. Total engineering fees for all the projects, and I'm going to get into a little more detail about that. Total grants that we've received since 2019, those are just to complete the HSAs. And then the total landmarked buildings. So currently, since 2019, we're at about a 33% success rate of having a landmark structure come out of an HSA. Now, when we factor in all the ones that are in process, which you may see next year, you may see in 2026, we'll see, we end up getting close to a 60% success rate with what we forecast coming up. That's amazing. That is an off-the-chart success rate that no other historic preservation program sees, I guarantee it. So diving into the analysis, the engineering fee is really important. So I need you to keep in mind that the way we do the engineering fees is that we split that time. We do about 50% of the work, and then our structural engineer does the other 50%. They obviously do the heavy lift on the analysis, the code review, the calculations, things that we're not technically intended to be qualified to do. But we do all of the writing, we do all of the narrative for them. So with that, if you go down a little bit further, the total residential engineering fee, total commercial engineering fee actually increases over what you see above. And currently, our percent of budget is actually a little higher than what I had told you earlier this year. We're at about 30% of our HSA budget is dedicated towards structural engineering in the residential field, and then we're right on the mark for commercial. I think I had mentioned that it's usually like a 1-to-4 relationship between our work and the engineer's work. So commercial seems about right. When we go down a little bit further, you start to see our average hours per project. I had told you earlier this year that residential, we shoot for 40 hours per week. Sometimes we're better, oftentimes we're not, because some of these homes are complicated, and size is not the determining factor. It is usually how they're added onto, how they're originally constructed, or how difficult it is for us to access the information. But what you can see is that the actual fees dedicated to residential are on the low side. We knew that. We've known that for years. It's a labor of love for us. We love doing it, and we're committed to continuing to do it. But to actually do the reports the way we do them, it needs to be higher to be more of like something that I think would be attractive to more than just 3 architects doing these reports. And one primary one doing the handful of them, the lion's share of them. The commercial fees, if you look, they're actually pretty darn close to what we have set up for the grant funding. The average hours are higher. Sometimes they're better. Oftentimes they're more. We've had a few that were relatively easy to get through. We've had a few that were really hard, like the Methodist Church that was so big and there was so much complication in how it was built that we had to spend quite a bit more time. But you can see that the fees, if we include engineering on the far right, you know, the residential and the commercial actually look a little closer than the way we allocate them now. And so we have some recommendations. We feel like residential grant amounts should actually be closer to 7,500. We think commercial grant amounts should be closer to 10,000. Now, I'm going to caveat that in that I think that what's missing from commercial grant amounts is that we strongly suggest that an MEP engineer also be included with a structural engineer. You'll notice that we say required architect, licensed architect with HP experience. Rob mentioned that earlier. There is a section in there where it doesn't necessarily require an architect. You can be a qualified professional, which that's something that's debatable, maybe something to look into. We feel like someone who is licensed within the state is a good recommendation. We definitely feel on all HSAs, a licensed structural engineer in Colorado should be required. We feel like only on commercial, an MEP should be strongly suggested to be a part of the analysis. And then there could be this proposal to exceed those amounts depending on the complication of the structure. And I think a proposal will need to be presented to you during the probable cause determination process to basically demonstrate why that would be. And we could look at, you know, commercial grants up to 15,000, which sort of matches where the state is. That's sort of a general grant that they offer, but, you know, for ours, it'd be specific to commercial. And then residential up to 10,000 max. We also feel that as a part of the reports, accurate floor plans should be drawn, color-coded with a legend to tell the story of the structure. These are things that should be documented at the library. All of our HSAs should be cataloged and documented at the library. I don't believe that's the case. This should be done. And I think in combination with the assessor records plan. So I realize I've gone over my time, even though I pooled. I am historically known to do that. I am very happy to answer any questions. I think really your questions are geared towards staff at this time, but I'm obviously here and available and happy to talk further in detail.
Thank you so much. It is really helpful to have a professional that does it kind of give us that perspective. So we appreciate you putting this together for us. Does anyone have any specific questions?
I too appreciate you sharing all this information. I think it's valuable.
My only question was the MEP. I should know that. What does that stand for?
Mechanic.
Huh?
It's electrical, plumbing,
Okay.
mechanical engineering.
Okay, mechanical engineer
So
professional.
it's
Is that
it's duct work.
okay.
I'm sorry. It's duct work. It's going to be electrical and then plumbing.
Okay,
So
perfect.
the three
That makes
major
sense.
components that go in there.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. No, you're fine.
If you have any questions while we're being distracted.
So Rob, I have a question for you. Not to put you on the spot, but you mentioned that you might have some proposals on how we might structure the grants going forward. I'd like to see those if possible. Might give us a good starting point.
Yeah, I think my question is, I know it's on your work plan to look at all the grants together. You know, I think I don't know how long that's going to take. I know with our staffing issues, it's taken longer than we've all wanted. You know, I think there's a couple ways to do it. If you want, we could try to move forward ASAP just with this project and come with some proposals. I don't know if they'd really be much different. You know, like we have the architect that does the lion's share and is showing us, you know, we reach out to a few other architects and professionals and just kind of truth it a little bit and come back with recommendations. It'd probably be very similar, if not the same. I think that's what we were thinking, trying to go up near the state. So we can come back with a resolution recommendation that you could propose to city council that would just deal with HSAs, or we could maybe wait a little longer and dig into all the grants and process one resolution. That might take another month or two more. So I'd leave it up to you to kind of advise us. We could probably do it either way.
Okay. Can we see those questions again, the discussion questions?
Yep.
Because I think going through some of those first might help us, Keith, kind of get to maybe some of the numbers. Because I think the kind of having some of the numbers from the presentation just a minute ago too will kind of help us direct that a little bit too.
Yeah, so here's the questions. I don't know if you just want to go through. I just want to make sure you all feel like you're comfortable understanding the process that we have people go through, as well as the content.
All right.
And maybe just make sure there aren't any questions about that to start with before we get into the funding and so forth.
All right. And so I guess too, like this is just kind of, so when an applicant contacts and says, okay, I'm ready for the HSA, the staff, do you give them the list of qualified professionals like that?
Yeah, we do have a list of qualified professionals. It hasn't been updated in a long time. We basically tell people it can be any license. And I think the resolution doesn't say you have to be a licensed architect, but our guide does still say that. So I think we'd probably push or require that a licensed architect be the primary still. But we probably should update the resolution next time we update it to clarify that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, I think almost everyone that comes to us is already working with DAJ Design or another local architect. It's been a while since we've had to refer someone out.
Okay. And then the architect or the applicant is given the application as far as like what the expectations are and
Yeah,
that
yeah.
whole thing
If
that
it wasn't one of our local architects, we would probably want to have a meeting with them, go over the scope, if they hadn't done one before that followed the same scope, to make sure that they were familiar before they went through all the trouble of writing the report. And we said, no, it doesn't, So we'd make sure they had everything.
And I guess the question I have too is how often do HSAs come in and then you send them back for needing more information or?
Yeah, it's not that often. I can't recall the last time. Certainly we usually have a historic preservation specialist that reviews them. I do know that has happened in the past, but it's probably been several years. It's probably been several years that one of our local architects, since it's been someone else that's done one, that we've really had to say, hey, there's some things missing here.
Okay.
Do you have any idea how many HSAs never go any further than the HSA
we haven't run those statistics yet, but it sounds like what Andy was saying, if I'm correct, that was it 30% or 60%? You had said 30% at one point, and then you were suggesting 60. If you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so currently we're at about a 30% success rate. If our projections are true, we're going to be around 57%, so close to 60% success rate for an actual landmark
After an
designation.
HSA.
And I could bring up that page if you're interested to see it.
It looked like it was pretty heavily weighted with the stuff that's been in 24, which was a lot of them. And again, it was, there's a recency to that, so it just hasn't manifested itself yet.
That's true. There's a latent effect for all of these HSAs. Usually it's a year.
Pretty good sized lag measure, I'm sure.
I would say one of the things we do as staff is if somebody's coming in for a demolition, and they intend to demolish the building, we do encourage them to do an HSA. Just because even though they're very serious about demolition, it can provide information about the structure before we lose it, and also just increases the chances that they may decide to landmark once they see, they start working with an architect and start maybe envisioning a plan forward.
All right.
I don't know how many of those actually come to fruition, but it's just a tactic that we try.
I think one of the big problems here is that we do get a lot of requests for going into this process, the probable cause to start this, and very few seem to come out to actually being landmarked. For example, in the last year, according to our minutes, we've heard 18 requests for probable cause, and we landmarked 4 structures, one of which was mine, which didn't go through the local architects. Although the page on the website that lists the people who can do HSAs, as you say, it's not up to date. Like Scott Coburn, I'm pretty sure doesn't do HSAs in Louisville. And a group called the Collaborative, by coincidence, that is who I used. But he had never done one in Louisville. And he wasn't questioned by the staff about the report that was coming out, as you mentioned. So I think what we really need to work on is that the big projects that involve hundreds of thousands of dollars, they get a good architect involved. There's a lot of money involved, and somebody can be paid to do that background. But we also have a lot of requests for people who just love the idea of having a historic old town and to have their house be part of that. There was a woman down Pine Street who came last year. The house had been in her family for 80 years, and she would like to see that protected. But people get into that process, they don't have the money or the support to do something really elaborate. They may not need any structural work. They'd just like to see their house landmarked and protected. So there are different reasons people are going through this long process, and it's not supportive at all to the simple requests of just having a place recognized and being landmarked in Louisville. Like I said, there are 18 probable cause requests in the last year on our agendas. Really, 3 of those were landmarked.
Sure, go ahead.
Out of the 18 that we've completed since 2003, I just counted 4 of them came to us after they had talked to staff and determined that they wanted to go through a probable cause determination.
Okay.
The other 14 were people who came to us with a building asking what to do, and we talked to them about the historic preservation program. So, there's probably this other thing going on out there that I know we, Stewart Architecture and Hartranft, we're promoting this program. We're incredibly proud of it, all of us. Obviously, Peter and
Right.
Eric are the genesis of the program. And, we just, really, the only thing we wonder is why this thing isn't out winning national awards, truly.
Yeah.
It is so unique and so out of the box.
And that part of it is working very well.
It is.
It's just the simple, having a place landmarked, noted as part of the community that doesn't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we never get any feedback, really. We hear, that I know of, there's a probable cause request, we approve it. They said, that sounds really good. And then we never hear it again. As you mentioned, or both of you did, the HSAs probably should be archived, and putting them on the Laserfish site with our notes, that would be a good place to do that. Most of the landmark properties do have historical documents that have been done by the museum over time, but not all of them, and they should be on that site as well. So that Laserfish site, which has all of the city council documents, resolutions, and things like that, should be updated with all that.
I think too, to your point of someone who doesn't have, you know, the money that they want to spend to like, to restore or do a big project or whatever, I think at the same time, that's exactly what the HSA, it's a benefit because they can landmark and we invest in them knowing what the condition their house is in. And they don't have to spend another dime after that. So I think that's kind of maybe a misconception too, is like they could apply for a probable cause and we can help them find a professional if they didn't come with a professional. But we can have them have a professional look at their house, make sure that it's in tip-top shape, or just so they know what they're living in, you know, just have expectations of, and then they don't ever have to do anything again, you know?
That's right.
So I think that's the side of it too, of like they don't have to have all the money to invest. If they don't want to, they can just landmark, and we will pay for that peace of mind of just knowing what is, you know, how their house.
Definitely a benefit.
So-
It's just the question of why, if people take that first step, maybe they'd like to know more about their foundation and their history. But I think a lot of them that I've talked to would like to have a landmarked property, and it just doesn't happen. And we don't really know why.
Right, and that's probably just outreach. It's probably not following through and all that on our side. But, yeah, hopefully the HSA itself isn't the hindrance to people landmarking.
Well, as both of you pointed out, there isn't a requirement that the project be led by an architect. That's spelled out in the 2019 resolution. But a lot of cases, it is good to be led by an architect. But those simpler cases where people just want to see a project landmark, maybe there's a simpler solution than involving an architect or a structural engineer.
So let me try to restate, I think maybe a little bit of what you're saying. I may be wrong, but I think what you're saying is maybe you're recommending that we get rid of the requirement that you do an HSA before landmarking, that it's not a prerequisite to landmarking, even though you all can waive it. Is that what you're trying to say, is that we shouldn't make people do HSAs prior to landmarking?
That isn't what I was saying.
Okay.
That could be the case if people were strictly interested and the house has been in the family for 80 years and we'd like to see it protected and, you know, officially landmarked. How could you most optimally do that?
Right, so I think just to kind of talk through that a little bit, if nobody has to necessarily invest in their property, I think you could look at a structure and you can say, does it have enough architectural integrity to be landmarked without any restoration work? Most people want to take advantage of the grant program. That's a big carrot that we try to provide people. I'm not aware of anybody who hasn't landmarked. I don't know what the barrier is that we're worried about. I think, you know, everything's trying to say, hey, if you landmark, we give you all these benefits, but we don't tell anybody that you have to restore your home unless it's, you know, it's been renovated so it doesn't look historic, but that rarely happens. There's usually a restoration plan in place. Does that make sense? I guess I'm not sure. I'm trying to understand I don't know if you're trying to propose.
I guess I'm trying to
change to the
understand
program.
what the barrier is to properties being landmarked, to getting to that point.
So you're
If we
saying
only
there's-
have 3 happen in a year, then there's something wrong.
Yeah,
So-
you know, in our experience, people are concerned about, you know, losing the ability to redevelop their property. That's the biggest barrier. And everything about our grant program is about trying to give flexibility. We give zoning bonuses, we allow building additions. You know, we're like like Andy was saying, we have a very amazing, unique grant program to allow people to keep those buildings. So, yeah, if you have ideas about how to reduce those barriers in our next grant iteration.
The people who are concerned about being able to make future changes because of the restrictions of the landmark, they don't start the process at all. They don't ask for an HSA. They're trying to avoid the city, actually, so that they don't get their construction project held up.
You're gonna say
That makes
something?
sense.
Were you gonna say something?
If I look at it, I think I understand what you're saying. It would be interesting, so I absolutely appreciate the facts that you gave as far as 30% conversion rate right now, 60% anticipated or slightly thereof. It would be nice to kind of see some historical data on previous ones, pre-2023 or whatever else, which I don't feel like, I feel like we just had the most recent years from you, which is great. But again, if there's anything else where we had previous years from, 2017 on or whatever the date we establish is, it'd be interesting to see. I think it is our desire to have a decent number of those convert over. But I don't think you're ever going to get, greater than probably 60% anyways out of that whole setup, as far as, ones that are actually landmarked. I think that you'll have people that inquire for a little while and then take that information and go, which is, there's not necessarily an issue with that.
Just from externally and not seeing the internal statistics, it looks like we're running about 15%.
Yeah, this year's one's hard to, really, because there was such an uptick in the ones proposed this year or done this year. I think that it's an outlier to some extent.
Well, that could be.
And I think it'll take a few years to figure that one out.
I think through the life of the program, we have 64 landmarks. And was the program 20 years old or
Yeah.
something like that?
You could do a real hard number set up like that. A couple questions I had were, should there be any size considerations for different stuff? So I look at information we had. We had items such as the box cars that are on Pine right now, which are rather small and could come in for a $9,000 commercial setup.
4.
Was that? Oh, maybe it was 4. Okay. I was thinking that was on the commercial side, but I forgot that was a residential proposal. I kind of wonder if there should be a size consideration and then a request to go beyond that or some other sort with the amount that we offer. Just a question I have. I don't know if I have the right answer right now. Some other questions I had out of the presentation were, I know you had numbers in there. I know you spoke of one item or property that was extremely high on the level of commitment and everything else. So I kind of wonder if you took the 2 highest outliers and 2 lowest outliers, where those numbers would still sit, if that one really skewed it or not. It's just a question I have, again, not being around for this portion of it. The architectural versus professional portion, I feel like I would lean towards it should have a licensed architect with it, or a interview or something with the city to evaluate somebody that's not a licensed professional. I could see some caveat like that, at least, because I don't think you want to be hard and fast on that one necessarily. Just a thought. And yeah, really, I think what we want this to be is a tool to introduce people to the possibility of landmarking. And I appreciate all the time and effort and work that goes into the assessments. And I think that even if we don't get to it for a little bit, I could see bare minimum and incremental, percentage increase until we absolutely get around to evaluating it at a greater extent. At least as a stopgap, if we're able to just, kind of move forward. Seems to me that, you could do like at least on the residential side, do a 20% increase, and then we'll evaluate within this next year or something of that sort. as an option. I'm not saying we can't just look at it now too. So if that was really a proposal, if people were hung up on that portion.
I kind of wish our previous applicant had stuck around. We could have spoke to her a little bit more. I could be completely wrong, but I got the sense that she was asking for the HSA and maybe not necessarily wanting to do anything further, or maybe simply just landmarking, as Gary mentioned, just to have a nice property in town. But yeah, wish could have picked her brain a little bit.
Could be another exit questionnaire that goes out after somebody comes through for an HSA.
Yeah, we could send out a questionnaire to everybody who's gotten an HSA over a certain period of time, see what kind of response we get with some of these targeted questions. I guess one question I have for you, I think, well, I'd like to see if you all want to move forward with just increasing the grant amounts sooner than later. We could probably do that, even come to you with the proposal as early as next month. We could try. I think it's likely we could try to do that. And if we do that, to the second question up there, would you like us to also require structural engineering or have optionality with increased grant amounts if we come back with the proposal next month?
How many have been done without the structural engineer?
I only looked the last 2 years. They all had structural engineers.
I've always
one
known it.
indicated that they went over the city grant amount, but they didn't say how much. It's just because I only know that because it said it was partially funded by the HPC, so I don't know what the total charge was.
I was just curious because everything I've seen since I've been on the board always had a structural engineer.
Yes,
Involved.
the last few years. I'd have to go back more than a couple of years to try to find one.
I think it's really, if you're assessing these structures, I have a hard time not including them as a kind of hard and fast item unless there's, sufficient reasoning not to. Somebody's a licensed general contractor, worked for 40 years and could really evaluate it as well on their own.
One of the things we could do, and I didn't write that up there, is we could have a baseline of having a structural engineer, and when they come for the grant, I guess they can request a waiver to having the structural engineer if there was a unique case, and you could grant that for some reason. But we can make it as the baseline standard.
I would say that's a good way to approach it, in my opinion, but again, I'll put it out to other people.
In the neighborhood, though, the people who say have a house that's part of the Italian community and they'd like to have it landmarked as part of Old Louisville, they don't necessarily need that structural part. They're not intending to do that.
I'd be fine with a waiver, or at least I'd be fine with hearing the reasoning for a waiver on that one.
Or we wouldn't pay the full grant amount, like if it's up to whatever the amount is, like the hours that would have been spent on a structural engineer wouldn't be in there. Does that make sense? Like they just wouldn't, because they wouldn't have paid for as much, they wouldn't be reimbursed for as much.
Why give them the funds?
Yeah, so they would still have access to the HSA, but they wouldn't get the full amount if they didn't do the structural engineer. But do you agree with that?
I
Like
just
if they-
don't know that a structural engineer is always required. Because if you did have a person, maybe historian, who was doing HSAs and knew when to ask, knew when to involve an architect, who was trying to do a more straightforward version of the structural assessment, maybe they wouldn't need to bring in an architect or a structural engineer.
I would really lean towards the fact that I think that we should look to professionals to at least weigh in or evaluate on this one, if it were my opinion.
I'm not saying that person is not a professional. They just may not have gone to college as an architect.
And again,
Engineer.
I would lean back on my suggestion that there's a suggested route or an approved route, or you can come and state your
Well,
case.
that would work too, yeah.
So I think that you always want to leave things at least somewhat open-ended, or you're just kind of forcing things through on my end. That's how I see it.
I feel pretty strongly that a licensed, both an architect and an engineer should be involved in these. I just think they're so involved. There's so much that needs to be studied that, I mean, that there could be somebody that is capable of looking at a structure, but I think for the amounts of grants that we're going to be proposing, I think we need to have a licensed architect and an engineer both on board.
You'd really have to convince me otherwise to not,
Right.
is where I sit.
I think it just sets the standard of that's just like where we're not being subjective of like, oh, well, how many years? But if we have a certification of like, yes, you're a structural engineer and yes, you're an architect, like that just takes the guesswork out of the quality of work for us, because that's not really our job to qualify people. So, yeah. I also thought it was interesting in the presentation, you talked about that if we actually paid what the professionals are basically spending to do the work per hour, like we might have more people willing to do it. Like that was an interesting, like we might have less people doing it just because no one wants to spend the time and energy doing that, perhaps. But if we actually pay what it's worth, that might kind of open up the pool a little bit. That's something to consider too. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to agree, and I'm also in favor of making sure that there's an architect and an engineer involved, and I'd also be in favor of coming back next month with a proposal for the increase in the grant amount so that we make progress on that, because it seems pretty clear that that's something that needs to be done.
And I wonder too, to your point, maybe the barrier is that people have to be reimbursed. So maybe if we're saying you have to pay out of pocket $9,000 now, like
That could be,
someone may not have $9,000 that they want to put up to be reimbursed
Yeah.
for. So maybe that's
Well,
some
I
of it
don't really
too,
know.
and that
I
might
just-
be a barrier that we address of like, is there another way to
Yeah, that could-
have it paid for or through the loan program or something where they're not having to pay out of pocket, but they can still be reimbursed. So that might be something on a whole other
yeah,
side.
it's unclear why people, residents of the
Right.
old town are interested in landmarking.
Right.
And yet, even though they take the first step, it just doesn't happen.
I mean, I would think that there's a human factor in all of it, that people kind of think it's a great idea and then get tired. You know, there's time and mental load involved in keeping up the momentum of the process. So,
But maybe we can help them.
I don't know if I'd really be in favor of paying anything up front besides a retainer or something of that's like,
No.
like if you're proposing that, I'm just
No,
not.
it would have to be some sort of, like not up front.
Sliding scale.
Yeah. I'm not arguing against
Yeah,
it.
no, I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm just saying like that could be a potential barrier that someone may not have the means of like putting up that money.
So in 2023, there was a subcommittee I was on that developed a user experience survey that we got relatively far with, I think practically completed. And then kind of other work came up, so it wasn't distributed. We were intending to have users come in for interviews and correlate that data to look at all sorts of things that we're discussing tonight. So we will look at our work plan tonight, but just to kind of put that back out there, that it seems like that might be something we want to revisit to get some of that information from people who have interacted with the program in different ways. I'm going to kind of defer to our professionals in terms of requiring structural engineers, but we've been talking about increasing these grants amount throughout 2024, so I would be also in favor of moving forward, just to keep it moving forward. I think there is a need to increase these grants sooner rather than later, so I would be fine with separating out the HSA grant, have that proposal made first, and then come back to the other ones, because The other ones, all of it, doing it all at once is a very, very involved discussion. So if we, are talking about this now and getting some ideas out there, I'd be happy to hear more on it sooner.
I agree. I think it's great that we focus on the HSA first and then follow up with the following grants.
Yeah, I agree with that. Did
Andy's
you-
been wanting to say
yeah,
something.
Yes.
something.
Please.
The reimbursement process is not a barrier. We have never had that turn into an issue. It works. It's a good protocol. It is also not a barrier towards whether someone wants to do an HSA or whether they want a landmark. At least not with the clients that we've worked with. Pardon the brevity, we do a really good job on our reports right out of the box. The structural engineer as a part of that team is critical. Like, that is absolutely the icing on the cake. Our reports would not be, like, we take 50% of the meaning out of it when we take the structural engineer out. And I know those proportions sound weird given their contributions seem relatively small. They are huge. And our understanding of the structure is just infinitely better. As architects, I know you two can appreciate that very much. Consider this. HSA should be required for every grant request. Landmarking, however, probably doesn't need it. Like, for example, if someone emotionally just wants to landmark their home because they love it and they want it to be a part of that landmark fabric within Louisville, great, do it. But if they go for a grant application, I think an HSA should be required. Here's why. We offer a lot of money. There's a potential for a substantial amount of money that
Exactly.
no other community really goes for. And we should understand these buildings to understand if they're really worth it. And we've had a few where we actually said, it's not worth it. And those are sad circumstances, but they're just circumstances. And, you'd hate to put good money after bad, or have it turn out to be that way. So I think the process, just getting back to the reimbursement, it's fine. The barrier to landmarking is twofold. There's a perceived burden that a landmark puts on a property. It's like a conservation easement. It's in perpetuity. Those are scary things to consider, particularly if you're not going to do a big project and you're going to be sort of theoretically built out, or maybe actually built out from a zoning perspective, where you're really not doing much more than what's being proposed in a project. We've had plenty of those, and that makes sense. Like, conceptually, that makes sense. And real estate professionals can get behind that. But realtors are probably your worst enemies, to be perfectly frank, in that there is definitely a perceived burden and possibly a devaluing of the property that's not actual, but perceived, that I think happens out there. Now, I think once a program or a project is landmarked and they do improvements, and it's this great example of the program with an addition, it makes this home last so much longer, then I think the value actually increases. And I've heard this from a number of realtors who I regularly work with. Exactly those words. And so I get that question every single time, even if I've talked to them about it 20 times before. Know your audience, and also know who's selling this. You have a lot of advocates in the community, or at least a few, who really beat the drum. Staff can only do so much. It's not necessarily their job to sell the program. It's just to inform residents on how to do it. You need the people who can sell it, because it gets people over the hump. It builds confidence in the homes that they purchased. And it gives them hope for a structure that, feels tired and maybe not worth it. So don't underestimate, the power of this program to be able to landmark. And if you look at the landmarks, which I think are 74 now, that is a tremendous amount. And so the value that these HSAs give, the power that the grant program gives to our preservation program are just absolutely key. It all goes away without it, to be honest.
And I think, just to reiterate Gary's point, I think he's talking about people that that are not working with professionals in the first place, right? So that's the only thing I was going to say.
They're
And
not planning on building
right.
a
So they don't have like
big addition in the
representation.
back of a
So,
historic house.
yeah.
Once they work with a professional who's used to the program,
Right, but if they
They will
don't
be-
want to do
they will be
anything.
informed.
Right, but if they don't want to do, I think his point is like that purist. So, and I would be in favor
Yeah.
of someone just being able to landmark without much to say. But,
Yeah, I would say if somebody came to us and
Right.
said, we don't want to do an HSA, but
Right.
we
We're
definitely
just-
want a
we just wanna do
landmark,
it for
then
the-
we would just bring them forward. I've never had any, well, maybe we've had one person say that, but we wouldn't put up, there would be no barrier to them doing that. We would let them know, we want them to be with full transparency.
Right.
That if they've got 3 years to get their grants, and if they want grants, they're definitely gonna have to do an HSA
Right.
to do that, so.
Yeah, I want to make clear, I'm not advocating against having architecture or a structural engineer. In my recent landmarking, I had an architect. We brought in a structural engineer, and the structural engineer wanted to bring in another architect who specialized in antique brick. And, yeah, but the architect I originally brought in wasn't familiar with our program, so he asked for the money for the time he spent, not for the whole amount.
So I think I've heard from most of the commissioners that you want to require an structural engineer. And maybe we can put in the resolution that they can, if they don't want one for some reason, they can explain why, and you can waive it. But maybe we start as the baseline. And then we'll come back with some proposed grant amounts
That's great.
at an upcoming meeting, and some amendments to the language to reflect the discussion. I think I've got a
Yeah.
pretty good grasp. You can always make amendments when we bring the resolution language back if we didn't capture it all.
Now, the resolution that set the current amounts had gone before the voters. This wouldn't have to do that again, would it?
You're right, no, the resolution didn't go through to the voters. That was actually crafted with the commission, and then council adopts that resolution. That was done after the fund vote separately.
Okay, I see, yeah.
All right, any other points to throw in before we?
It would be good to get feedback about what has happened to the probable cause requests. It would let us know better how to design the program. That is,
Following up on what you were talking about.
I do agree with that. I feel like it gets kind of lost and in the shuffle after the first point they come through. I just as far as us being informed on other information.
Yeah, we could find a way to use some technology just to post them publicly, generally. I didn't ask this question specifically, but we've talked about it in the past. I mean, once we get a final one in, we could simply email it to the commission, just so you have the opportunity to review each one. Just for the purpose of being informed, if you would like, we can certainly get in the habit of doing that.
Or at least have a database where you can access it. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we would just have to go back, pull all those out. We could certainly do that. It's a small project, but a little bit of a project that we can get to some point here.
Yeah.
I like the idea of putting it on our Laserfiche if we can't find a better way
it's not
to do
the
it
smoothest tool, but it's what the city uses for
for the public
resolutions,
records, yep.
minutes.
All right. So our next item is our annual work plan. We're just going over 2024 year. Go to their staff report.
evening again. Oh, let's see.
And then back on.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see one more time.
Need to take the screens up and down again.
Hopefully, we won't have to get to that again. Okay, I'll try not to touch anything. Hopefully, it'll stay up now. This is the 2024 HPC work plan. It's a little hard to read in writing, but the full work plan is in the packet for tonight. This was last updated before the Historic Preservation Commission in April of this year. So now is the time to review everything from the year 2024 and, possibly consider what's been accomplished, what to move to next year. But this is not a discussion for the 2025 work plan. It's mainly just to review what's happened this past year. And I will just start with the first item, which is the grant program update. That's the main item on this work plan that staff had a big part in doing. And as you probably know at this point, that will likely be moved into the 2025 work plan. There isn't much of a significant update since the last work plan was updated on that.
Emily, do you want to, I can zoom in if you want to just change it to click share as you're talking, and then we can try to zoom in to see it, I think. Sorry, I thought it was going to be seamless here. Of course, it doesn't work right away. I can zoom in wherever you want there as you talk.
Great, thank you. So yeah, as I was saying, the grant program update, there is not much of an update from staff. This will be continued into the 2025 year. So moving down, we can just start on the next list of items.
The events.
Yeah, for events, is there any changes or discussion about the events from this year, from the work plan? Okay. We can move down to the map update. And again, I guess I'll just go around for each item and we can just see if there's any update from commissioners on these items. And I'll provide update from staff, although for most of these items, there's no new updates.
Yeah, I think with the map update, we had inquired with the staff GIS architect, and I feel like it kind of ran in circles and then fell off. So I think it would just be probably, if we want to choose to go forward with that, it'd probably be starting right back there again in 2025.
You know, actually, there is a new update to that. I believe possibly when you were discussing this before, we did not have an on-staff GIS member, but we do now.
I think we did, and then we didn't.
Okay, well, now we do since July. Pretty steady GIS staff member.
Was this program to update the story map or to update so our land use map also has just a layer with all the landmarks, which I think it's updated.
You know, I think when we talked about it before, it was trying to, I guess, identify ones that have been right now we have ones that have been landmarked, but we have nothing else that goes in there with it. And I don't know if we have targeted landmark items, which we've discussed before as far as the commission, and how to go through and identify some of those, maybe a higher level of desire to have something landmarked. And then just also maybe going through and highlighting, missed opportunities, portions where things have been torn down before we had an opportunity to talk to somebody about something of that sort. So I think just a greater story that went with the map and that you could dig in, because I think what we have right now is pretty good as far as, understanding the items that have been landmarked, but we could even have another one where we have done, grant application or had HSAs done on them, or some other level or layer that you could get into it to find out. And then if there's any other stories that we have with some of the other structures that haven't been landmarked, if you were able to link those with a property or an area, I think there could be a greater thing there. So,
So I'm hearing maybe some GIS analysis that helps inform what we do or how we promote the program. And I was thinking it was just the public facing, but it's more analysis.
yeah, I think it's more of like a diagramming or mapping exercise probably to start, and then go from there. And I provided I had done a 3 or 4 block example of it and provided it to Amelia prior to her leaving, of a thought of how it could go.
And just a note on the story map, if that's involved in this entire map update thing as well, our GIS coordinator has taken a look at the story map, the public-facing landmarking map, and believes that in the next year or two, that GIS interfacing that it's using will be outdated, and it will eventually just slow to a stop. So that's something to consider too if we're updating any of our maps.
Okay.
Okay, so next is the construction grant signage. Is there any update or discussion on this program? Okay. So next is our HPC bylaw update.
So the bylaws have been reviewed, and suggestions for revisions have been made. We shared those with the commission, I believe, in the November meeting. We are waiting for the city council to do some citywide additions to all of the bylaws for the commissions in the city. And once those are included in our draft bylaws, then those the final copy that we presented will be brought back for full consideration and discussion and approval by this commission.
All right. On to social media, and then general outreach. We can just group those together.
Yeah, social media kind of fell off this year, so we'll pick that up. But
okay, and I believe that's all staff had about the 2024 work plan. I'm here to answer any questions you have on the overall work plan, or if there's any further discussion.
and I think this will be helpful, like going forward, like we have kind of a map of expectations for next year as we have a new staff member and stuff, so.
I think we all have great intentions. It's just getting there.
Yeah. So. Yeah. All right, thanks for putting that together and going over that with us. Then our next is updates from staff.
Any other update? Do you have any other updates you want to go over with them? Do you want to do it up there? Okay.
Okay, just a few updates from staff. We had no alteration certificates under subcommittee review this past month, and there were 3 demolition reviews. All 3 reviews were released in the subcommittee. And the upcoming schedule, the next regular Historic Preservation Commission meeting is supposed to be held on January 20th of 2025, but that is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, so that date will have to be moved to a new date.
And we don't have that date yet, is that right?
We don't have that date yet.
Okay.
I think tonight might be a good time to set that date, if there are any suggestions.
The 13th or the 27th, either date works with everyone.
Does Monday still work as far as the building, if we go before or after? I think usually we've just gone the week after, it seems like, but
Yeah,
sometimes there's conflicts.
Yeah, we can confirm that we have the room, but if you are all available on the 27th, then we can tentatively plan that and then confirm with you all once we get the room reserved. And if you don't know tonight, we can send out an email.
Yeah, that's fine for me. I think I already have it on my calendar, but.
Either the 13th or 27th works
Yeah.
for me.
27 works.
I lean towards the 27th, but we should probably do an email just to confirm that way.
Sure.
Yeah. Does the 27th work for most everyone? Okay. So I say
Okay,
try,
yeah, so we'll plan on that, but we'll send an email follow-up and.
yeah. Or
reserve
if for
the
some
room.
reason that's booked that week, we
Yeah.
might look at the 13th if one of us has a conflict. So that should be good.
All right, and that's all from staff. Thank you.
And do we have any staff updates as far as a new HPC planner or anything, like any hopefuls?
Sure, yeah, we do have a finalist who, from out of state and had some weather delay issues with her flight in, so we're rescheduling, but it's probably gonna be early January because of the holidays before she can come in for the in-person interview. So, yeah, that, we have that finalist coming in and we'll keep you updated if that works out. Otherwise, we're probably back to re-advertising, again, unfortunately.
All right, good to know. All
Can I
right.
ask if we have a new commissioner replacing Gary?
Yeah, there will be there should be a recommendation in the city council packet that'll be voted on tomorrow night for the replacement. So that should be on the website.
Okay. And that's our update for commission members, is that Gary won't be joining us next year. So he's completing his term and time with us. So, yeah, it's a sad day.
Oh, well, thank you all. I've enjoyed it, and I think there are a lot of people out there with good ideas, and it'd be good to have new energy in the commission, so I'll be traveling more.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing. Yeah, we've greatly appreciated your time and insight and just your thoroughness. So thank you for all the time.
even I'm often in the adversarial seat from the rest of it.
It's good, a challenge, it's a good challenge. Uh-huh.
I guess.
Yeah. I think always just like going through things with a fine tooth comb and being diligent about questions and all that is really important. So, yeah, it's good work. So thank you.
Well, I enjoyed working with all of you too. You taught me so much.
Ugh.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, any other updates from anybody?
I did bring up at the last meeting that one of the outreach things we do is contribute a small article to the Downtown Business Association newsletter.
Yep.
I took that over from Caleb when he moved up to the city council, so you might want to find somebody to do that.
Yeah, we'll add that to our January
Okay.
election time. Yeah, that's good. Thanks for remembering that.
They'll ask for the newsletter before the January meeting, but,
Oh, okay. I might talk to you about that then.
okay.
Okay. That's good. All right.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
I'll second.
Was that a second? 2 seconds?
So.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, good night. Thank you.